Yeah, so on Friday on the school box, I posted this practice question and I wanted you guys to just give it a go. So it's just a research scenario and it's just looking at an experiment that was done about sleep and, an ability for sleep to basically help people concentrate. So that's basically what the study was about. So we'll read through it anyway and we'll pick out what are the important details and then we're going to use it to answer the questions on the next few slides. So the question of the research scenario, the research question is, can a short episode of sleep help our ability to concentrate? So that's the research question. And a lot of the time in your research question, you will have the IV and the DV in the research question itself. So just reading through it, it says various studies have demonstrated that a night of sleep has a beneficial effect on our concentration levels. Sleep researchers addressed the question of whether this extends to daytime naps. In this experiment, they were observing the driving ability of participants after a daytime nap of 30 minutes or after they had completed a set of difficult logic tasks for 30 minutes. A sample of 26 university students, so 19 female, 7 male, aged between 20 and 29 years, with the average age being about 24.8, participated in the experiment in exchange for financial compensation. So obviously they're participating in the experiment and they're getting some money for doing that. Although it was made clear that they could still leave the study if they wished to. All participants had a driver's license and had been driving for at least 3 months. All participants provided written consent and were randomly selected from the population. One participant was excluded from the study as they were unable to fall asleep during the daytime napping condition. The p-value, we're not doing p-values anymore, so I'm just going to scribble that out. P-values are no longer on our study design. And this is the table of results. So it shows you the mean number of driving mistakes in the napping condition and in the logic task condition. And then you've got the caption, and the caption is always important for you to read whenever you get a table or a graph, because it kind of gives you an idea of what the study is, measuring. Okay, and a lot of the time, if we can understand what the data is showing us in terms of the measurements of what variables are being measured, we can figure out the IV and DV from that as well. So if we look at the napping condition and the logic task condition, it's clear that in the logic task condition, there are a higher number of mean driving mistakes. So there's a higher average number of driving mistakes in the logic task condition as compared to the napping condition. So this kind of helps us to kind of maybe work towards drawing a conclusion that people who napped made fewer or made lower mistakes on a driving test. So possibly the hypothesis should be that napping would obviously, or sleep, a short episode of sleep would help our ability to concentrate. So that's kind of what the hypothesis is kind of moving towards, okay? Just looking at those results there. Anyway, we'll just go through each question now and try to understand what, try to link it back to this case study or scenario here. Before we do that, I've already bolded it on the slide here, but there are certain things that you need to look out for when you do research scenarios. Number one, you want to be analyzing, okay, what are they actually observing in the study? What are they measuring? In this case, it's driving ability. This is the variable that's being measured for change. And so this will, as a result of that, be the DV. What we're manipulating, the variable that's being manipulated is going to be the sleep. Okay, in this case, the sleep has been operationalized as a daytime nap. Okay, not as an 8-hour sleep, but just as a daytime nap of 30 minutes. So if you're in the experimental group in this study, you're going through the daytime nap for 30 minutes. And the control group, obviously, they're the ones that are not exposed to the IV. They're not exposed to the napping. And instead, they are exposed to completing a set of difficult logic tasks for the same amount of time for 30 minutes. Okay, the sample is the people who are in the study. So obviously, the sample is our 26 university students. Aged between 20 and 29 years. That's our sample. And there's a bit of information here about the ethical principles that were met and all that kind of stuff, as well as the sampling technique that was used, which was random sampling. So again, you can get a lot of information out just by looking at the research scenario. And it's a good habit and a good practice for you guys to start, when you're getting a research scenario, to start highlighting important things so that when you go back and look at it after you've read through the questions, those things, are really clear for you to see because you've already highlighted them. Okay, so that's basically just us analyzing and annotating that research scenario. So let's go straight into the questions. The first question was identify the research design used in the study above and to justify your response. Justify your response just means give a reason for why you chose that particular research design rather than another one. So it's worth 2 marks. So you're going to get 1 mark for identifying or naming the research design used, and 1 mark for giving the reason for why you chose that. So the answer is independent groups design. And you get 1 mark obviously for mentioning that. So I just want to show you guys how the marks are allocated. So 1 mark for showing or for writing down independent groups design, and 1 mark for indicating the reason why you chose that response. So the main reason would be that there are 2 clear conditions, which is an experimental condition and a control condition. You could have also said that there are 2 main groups in the study, which is an experimental group and a control group. Okay, that's what an independent groups design is, that you've got 2 groups in a study and each one is independent of the other. Each one is going through 2 different conditions. So that's basically our justification or our reasoning for why we've selected independent groups design. Now you can obviously see in the scenario, I've just quoted this from the scenario. It says they measured the participants' ability to concentrate after a daytime nap of 30 minutes or after they had completed a set of difficult logic tasks. So that word "or" there is suggesting that there are 1 of 2 options, okay? A participant can't be in 2 options simultaneously or 2 groups simultaneously because those 2 groups are independent of one another. And that's why it's called the independent groups design. In most cases, if you read through a research scenario or a case study, and you can see that there are 2 clear groups, one being the experimental group, one being the control group, and there are different participants in each of those groups. It's not like one participant's going through both conditions. That would most likely then be an independent groups design. So you've got to be really clear with what the different research designs are. The other 2 are repeated measures designs and matched participants designs. Obviously, in our case, independent groups design was used, so that's why we're concerned with this particular design here. Also, it's also important for you guys, and you know, even at year 12 level, students can struggle with this as well because terminology can be confusing. So whenever you see the word research design, you should know what that means, okay? You should know that you're being expected to talk about one of 3 research designs. So either independent groups, either matched participants, or repeated measures. If you start talking about convenient sampling in this, you're not going to get an mark because convenient sampling is a sampling technique, not a research design. So it's very important for you to be clear with what the terminology also means for each of these topics. So you know what is expected of you. All right, so that's basically question 1. So that's a pretty easy question, not too hard. Going to the next question now, identify a limitation of using this research design. So when we did research methods in chapter 1, we looked at the fact that it's not just about knowing what an independent groups design is, but it's also about you being able to provide one advantage and one disadvantage of each of those designs. So basically a limitation is another word for a disadvantage, for a con, for a shortcoming of that particular research design. So what is the disadvantage of using an independent groups design? And remember, we said that you have to know at least 1 advantage and 1 disadvantage for each of those research designs. So let's just look at the answer. So let me just project that up. Right, so the main limitation of using this research design is that because each participant is different, you've got a different bunch of participants in the experimental group and a different bunch of participants in the control group, you're going to have more individual participant differences. You're going to have, you know, more room for potential confounding variables, okay? Because remember how we said in class when we were talking about the example of does a particular energy drink promote physical, you know, performance in physical activity. Okay, and remember how we said that if we just take a bunch of people and we don't control for certain variables, there might be someone who's training 5 days a week. They might already be physically quite, you know, capable compared to someone who is very sedentary or who doesn't do much physical activity. So already you can see that they've got an upper hand because of that individual participant difference, and it will affect the eventual DV. So much so that it will overtake the effect of our IB, which is the energy drink. So again, similarly in this study, individual participant differences could lead to this research design, which is the independent groups design, being affected in an unwanted way, and our results being affected in an unwanted way, okay? Specifically, if you're someone who doesn't do well with daytime naps, or you're not used to sleeping in the daytime, you would not show as much you know, as much performance or as much accuracy in that driving test, which is the DV, compared to, you know, someone who naps all the time during the afternoon and starts to automatically get tired at about 2 o'clock or 3 p.m. Okay, so that's basically what the limitation is. Okay, so we'll move on to the next question. So the next question is identify the sample of participants used in the study. Remember the sample, whenever you see the word sample, the sample means who are the specific people that are in my study, okay? The actual participants that went on to get into my study and do the tasks that were required of in my study. So that's basically the sample of participants. And we highlighted this in the scenario before. It's university students aged 20 to 29 years old who had a driver's license. So obviously this is our specific sample. These are the specific participants involved in our study. So this is worth 2 marks. It's worth 2 marks because if you just wrote university students without mentioning the age or the other detail, you would get 1 mark out of 2. But mentioning the age is very, very important there. Okay, because if you just mention university students, it could be any university student. We could even be getting like 30-year-olds or 40-year-olds who are university students. So you've got to be specific as to what the age of the participants in this specific study was. Okay, so that's why we do give you a mark for mentioning the age as well. And that's why it's worth 2 marks. All right, so hopefully that's pretty straightforward. So moving on to the independent variable now. So this question asks you to talk about the independent variable, which is the IV, in both simple and operationalized terms. So simple meaning non-operationalized, and operationalized meaning you're stating that variable in terms of how it's measured. So if we look at this question now, the simple IV in this case is the task undertaken, okay? So it could be napping or it could be logic tasks. You could also say, you know, the simple IV could also be sleep. So you could say sleep, and then in brackets, you could say napping for 30 minutes or doing logic tasks for 30 minutes. Again, this case study is a little bit open-ended, so you can interpret it in multiple ways, as long as it's something along those lines. Operationalized IV, so again, it's measured by whether the participant napped for 30 minutes or completed difficult logic tasks for 30 minutes. That's specifically how we're quantifying or measuring this particular independent variable in this particular study. So if you ever get a question that says identify the IV and it's only worth 1 mark, you don't need to operationalize it. You just need to give me the simple IV, which is just the task undertaken, napping or logic task, full stop. If we ask you to operationalize it, then you have to mention the 30 minutes and put a number to that particular variable there. Okay, so obviously you can't write IV like napping or not napping, even though in the study that is technically reflected in the study, but you have to be specific about what not napping means. Okay, you have to write napping or doing logic tasks for 30 minutes because it is specified in the study that that's what the group who didn't nap did. Okay, they did the logic tasks for 30 minutes. So you got to be kind of specific in that sense. Okay, so that's our question 4, which is talking about our IVs. Question 5 is the same, but looking at our DV. So identify the dependent variable both in simple and operationalized terms. So simple DV will be driving ability, and the operationalized DV, which is essentially how we're measuring driving ability, is going to be that driving ability is measured by the mean number or the average number of mistakes that are done during a 30-minute driving test. So the number of mistakes that are made during a 30-minute driving test is how we are measuring driving ability. And if you go back to the table, so I'm just going to scroll back a few. If you go back to the table, you'd realize that that's what the results are showing us, right? The table of results are showing us mean number of driving mistakes, okay? That's what the table is showing us. So that's essentially what the DV is. And that's why I said a lot of the time when you look at the results table or you look at the caption, it gives you a clear idea as to what is being measured, okay? If you can identify what is being measured, that is your DV. So it makes your life a little easier. Okay, anyway, going back to the DV. Okay, so that's our DV. So simple DV is driving ability, and the operationalized DV is driving ability as measured by number of mistakes you make during a 30-minute driving test. So that's pretty straightforward. And remember that you could measure driving ability in many different ways. Now, measuring it in terms of the average number of mistakes made is just one way of measuring it, okay? In another study, we might measure driving ability as you know, how quickly someone is able to maneuver their car through an obstacle course, okay, and how accurately they're able to do that without maybe knocking over like those orange cones or something like that. So again, that's another way of measuring driving ability, but for this specific study, this is how driving ability was operationalized or measured. Okay, so next question is construct a research hypothesis for this study. So this is a little bit more wordy. you'd have to write this in a few sentences. So remember, we always start off with the formula of iPod, or the memory chip of iPod. iPod stands for IV, population, operationalize your variables, and DV. And we always start with the word it is hypothesized or it was hypothesized. So that's basically how we start our hypothesis. So using this formula, the basic formula, or the, I guess, template you could say, would be it is hypothesized that our population who are exposed to the IV will show increased or decreased DV compared to the control group. So using that formula, if you plug in all the information from our particular research scenario case study, it will look something like this. It is hypothesized that university students, remember, we don't have to mention the age here. We don't have to say 20 to 29 in this particular part of the question. The reason being that we're not identifying the sample in the hypothesis, we're identifying the population. And the population is always stated quite generally without any specific age or specific information attached to it. Okay, so it is hypothesized that university students, aka P, population, who have a daytime nap for 30 minutes will have increased driving ability. So this is going to be our IV here. Will have increased driving ability. This is going to be our simple DV. And obviously the part in the brackets here is the operationalized part of the DV, as measured by a lower mean number of driving mistakes. And now we're looking at the control group. So compared to university students who do not have a daytime nap and who instead complete a set of difficult logic tasks for 30 minutes. So that's basically what our research hypothesis looks like. It's just a matter of identifying what those 4 variables are, the iPod variables, okay, and then just literally just plugging that in and just making a few sentences out of it. That's what writing a research hypothesis is about. Okay, so that's basically what the research hypothesis looks like. Now, if this is difficult for you right now, don't stress. Writing hypothesis is not something you can do overnight. It's something that does take a lot of practice. But yeah, we're just kind of like trying to prepare you guys to write proper hypotheses for next year as well. Okay, so this is the kind of hypothesis that would be expected at a Unit 3 and 4 level. So just make sure that, you get into the habit of understanding that these are the 4 components that every hypothesis must include. The hypothesis is never written, as like a story or like separate like components. It's just written as one coherent paragraph, okay? Just a few sentences, one coherent paragraph. It's got to flow and it's got to read well, okay? If you're talking about the IV in one corner and then starting to talk about the DV right at the end, and you haven't worded it in the sense that one affects the other, then obviously you have to work on improving that expression, the way that you express that hypothesis there. And a lot of the time it all boils down to how you express yourself, and having good written expression can help a lot in that sense. Even if you feel you don't have really good written expression normally, it's still something you can train yourself to do. It's just a matter of doing more practice questions and getting into the habit of writing more hypotheses like this. Okay. And the last question is outline any weaknesses or limitations in this study. So weaknesses or limitations could be extraneous variables, potential confounding variables, any ethical breaches if there are any issues with the setup or design of the study. So it's worth 3 marks. So you're expected to at least name about 2 to 3 and explain how do they affect the study and the study's results in an unwanted way. Whenever you're talking about extraneous variables, ethical breaches, anything you're talking about that's a limitation or a weakness for the study, you are linking it back to the explanation of how does this limitation or weakness affect my results in an unwanted way, or affect my DV, which is my results, in an unwanted way. Okay, it's very, very important. And a lot of you in the last SAC, you were able to identify the limitation or weakness, but you were not able to explain how it affected the results in an unwanted way. So that's something we really need to work on improving, so we know how to do that. Anyway, I'm just going to show you guys a sample response. So these are just some reasons. And one of the main problems that one of the main issues that we have with having limitations in a study is not simply that they affect our results in an unwanted way, but by affecting our results in an unwanted way, they don't allow us to generalize results back to the population. So that is basically the main implication of why we don't want to have limitations or why we don't want to have weaknesses in a study. So if you went through the study and you read through the study, the first thing that might have popped out to you was the imbalance in the gender sample. So there were 19 females who participated in this study and only 7 males. So that could potentially be a confounding variable for the study, because you've got so many females, more so than males, it's almost more than double the number. Females could be overrepresented in this particular study. And so that effect or that unwanted variable of gender could actually have an impact on the final results. Okay, the next one is individual participant differences. So like I said before, some participants might be very used to sleeping in the afternoon, while some participants might have better sleep schedules where they don't allow themselves to sleep in the afternoon. Some people might be better at logic-based tasks than other people. Some people might be just better in driving. They've been driving for 20, 25 years compared to someone who's just been driving for maybe not 20, 25 years. They've been driving for a longer time compared to other participants who might not have been driving for longer. So if you've got a university student who's like 23 years old and they've been driving since they were 18, like they got their Ps when they were 18, and then you've got someone who just got their Ps and they've only been driving for like 5 months, you're obviously going to see a difference there. And the person who's only been driving for 5 months is going to make more mistakes, not because they didn't have a nap, but because they're just a new driver in general. Okay, so that's what we call as the unwanted effect on results from individual participant differences. Also, you might have picked up on this, but because the participants were participating in the study for a financial incentive, that is, they're getting some kind of cash in exchange for their participation, participants might have been more motivated by getting that money from the researcher as compared to actually wanting to contribute to the research. And by not actually wanting to contribute to the research, or by just kind of being motivated by money, some participants might not have taken it as seriously. So maybe during the time they were supposed to have their afternoon nap, they were just on the phone, or they were just just watching TV. So they might not have actually cared about the actual study because they were mainly motivated by getting that cash or that financial incentive. So that can become a potential confounding variable, because if your participants are not cooperating and doing what they're supposed to do for their condition of the study, whether that's napping or whether that's doing the logic tasks, obviously your results are going to get confounded or affected in an unwanted way. So that's basically all of this stuff that we've just looked at here. And there are other reasons or other limitations you can also talk about. But all of this stuff we've looked at is us evaluating the research study. Okay, evaluating the research study is a higher order skill. It's not something easy to do. It does take practice, okay? It comes under this thing of critical evaluation and critical thinking, being able to look at a particular research scenario and critique it in terms of what are its weaknesses, what are its limitations, how could it be improved for the future, all that kind of stuff. So this is something that the more research studies you do and the more practice questions we do, the better you're going to become at doing this particular thing. And inshallah, we'll try to do more practice questions as well with research scenarios to kind of develop this skill a little more. Okay, so that's about it for today. So before you guys go, we don't have any learning activities to do for this particular, because we've already finished the research methods chapter. It's just a matter of, I'll just stop the recording first.